Welcome to our program IVD Ready by May 2024 with Platomics and to our webinar series. Today's topic is the intended purpose, and the webinar is entitled Give It a Purpose. For new participants, we at Platomics are a company that is based in Vienna. Our mission is to digitize and to automate regulatory processes for all stakeholders of the in vitro diagnostics. Our goal is to bring safe and effective innovations to market quickly and efficient for all stakeholders of the in vitro diagnostics, such as manufacturers, but also laboratories and health institutions. So we have started the IVD Ready program to guide laboratories and health institutions through the IVDR step by step in 1 year by 2024. My name is Simone Latkulik. I'm leading the customer success team for laboratories here at Platomics. My team and I support laboratories on our platform to achieve IVDR compliance for the in-house developed tests. Today we have invited following guests. Dr. Andreas Eckelt, he is Managing Director at IVDR Consulting. He is a highly experienced IVDR expert and accomplished professional in the field of in vitro diagnostics. He has an extensive background spanning over 25 years in the IVD and medical device sector. Andreas Oberleitner is Head of Quality Management and Regulatory Affairs at Platomics. His background is biomedical engineering. He has experience in regulatory affairs and quality management for different IVD product manufacturers for more than 20 years now. He is especially an expert in the domain of conformity assessment for medical devices. To the agenda, you can ask always questions in the QA section during the webinar, and we will try to answer them by the end of the webinar. To the agenda. So I will start with a brief introduction to the IVD Ready program, especially for our new participants. After that, our guest speaker will give an impulse lecture on the intended purpose under the IVDR. After this, Andreas Oberleitner will give a demonstration and a walkthrough the Plato-X IVD Assistant. I'm very happy to announce here our new release of the IVD Assistant by today. We're going to have a new design, a new wizard in the release, and Andreas will give a demonstration in the IVD Assistant of this new release for us. Good, so the in vitro diagnostic regulation, the IVDR, as you know, applies to all member states of the European Union. It was first published in 2017 with a 5-year transition period. The IVDR came then into force last year on May 26, 2022, with the first set of requirements for health institutions when it comes to their in-house developed diagnostic tests. The next set of requirements will become effective in May 2024. Now, the IVDR is a very complex topic, and within this program, we guide you step by step through the process, through the IVDR. Over the course of the year, we will accompany laboratories by offering webinars on a monthly basis, workshops, additional information, and on various thematic topics. On the slide, you can see the timeline until May 26, 2024. Each month, a webinar focusing on a specific topic will be held as shown on this slide. But what makes this program really unique is the fact that we not only educate you, but also enable all participating labs to create complete in-house IVD documentation via our digital platform. We really try to reduce here complexity for you. It's much faster. We guarantee high quality and also consistency of your documentation, and it's completely free of charge for laboratories and health institutions exclusively. We started with a kickoff webinar in June. On July 6, we talked about the strategy when it comes to documentation of your in-house diagnostic test. We released here also our strategy wizard, a tool that guides you through the different possible scenarios of your in-house devices in your laboratory, and also your strategy to come up with a certain strategy, how you can start with the IVDR in your laboratory. The videos and webinars, and of course of all upcoming webinars of our series in the future, will be available on our homepage in German and in English, as well as additional information and content of the program. Very important to say is to actively participate in the IVD Ready program. It's essential to use our software tool, the IVD Assistant. Why is this important? Because we release templates, wizards, so helper programs, helper tools in the IVD Assistant during the IVD Ready program. So therefore, this is also necessary for you to achieve IVDR compliance by the end of this program. So now we will start with today's topic, the intended purpose. We will start with a question to the audience. You can answer the question with a poll that appears. Here's the question to the audience. Are the IVDR requirements for the intended purpose of your in-house test already clear to you? You can answer here. You can choose very clear, somewhat clear, or not clear. We will present the results of this survey after the Impulse talk. And now I would like to hand over to our guest speaker and IVDR expert, Dr. Christian Eckelt. He will give a talk about the intended purpose under the IVDR.
Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. I like to emphasize that I'm a somewhat unusual IVDR consultant, as I had executive and sales and marketing assignments most of my career time. My company, IVDR Consulting, is essentially an access point to a growing network of experts covering the various sections of IVDR. When I was running a startup some years ago with the aim to develop an IVD assay and a reader device, I was told by a consultant to put an extra effort into the definition of the intended use before starting the assay development. A bit like a child being told to brush the teeth every night and every morning, I nodded, but didn't take it too seriously. Later on, when the product matured, I understood the importance. What I like to cover is, in a nutshell, the way the intended purpose affects IVDR by explaining the meaning, the definition, and the interrelation between the intended purpose and other components such as risk classification, performance evaluation, risk management, etc. If you Google through the various websites dealing with IVDR, you will eventually find the term intended purpose and intended use. Sometimes a difference in the meaning is emphasized, sometimes not. I will not go into details in explaining whether there is a different meaning. Fact is that the MDR uses intended purpose and FDA uses intended use, and the guidelines using intended purpose and intended use in the same meaning. What I like to demonstrate with this graphic is the overall process from the concept or idea to the final IVD conform device. A clear intended purpose definition will ease the subsequent steps and avoid unnecessary iterations, gaps, or misinterpretation, eventually causing a notified body to raise questions, which means eventually additional time and cost to comply with the IVDR. Regarding risk management, not only a clear understanding of the intended use, but also a foreseeable misuse is important to define. A few years ago, I met a company actually in San Diego, which does provide dumbest assumable users in order to help companies to make sure all potential risks are recognized, which is even more important because of the legal system in US. You might remember the lawsuit with the cat in the microwave. The intended purpose is the description for the intended medical use. If no medical purpose is intended by the manufacturer, then the product is not a medical device. The intended purpose will provide confirmation whether the product fits the definition of an IVD device and therefore whether the regulation applies or not. It doesn't apply, for instance, for sterilizers, laboratory centrifuges, general purpose pipettes, weighing machines, microtomes, pipettes, and flasks. However, if you assign a defined medical purpose to, for instance, a centrifuge, you can generate a medical device out of it. The intended purpose will further provide the basis for the classification of the device to the risk classes, as required by Chapter 5 in Article 47. The content and resulting limitations for labeling, instruction, promotional or sales material, the clinical evaluation, the technical documentation, storage conditions, and so on. Important, the intended use is not a description for product features and specifications. As we are in the somewhat transition between IVDD and IVDR, under IVDD, it is stated that the use for which the device is intended according to the data supplied by the manufacturer on the labeling, in the instruction for use and or in promotional materials. That means for at least the self-declared IVDs, no specific criteria were defined for intended purpose. Under IVDR, it requires a clear statement that must specify the intended purpose, such as what is detected, what is measured, is it a screening tool, a monitoring, a diagnostic tool, the specific informations in the content of a physiological or pathological state, potential impairments, predisposition, prediction of therapeutical outcome, or treatment response in general. The statement must further specify the intended purpose as whether it's automated or not, whether it's qualitative, semi-quantitative, or quantitative, and what kind of specimen is required. This chart indicates the rules which trigger the classification. As you can see, the intended purpose is a key element of this. When a device may be used for purposes which are covered by other classification rule, it leads to a classification into the highest class of those rules. A clear limitation of use should be included in the instruction for use and the technical documentation of the device. Just to give an example, a device intended to screen blood and tissue donations for syphilis would fall under Class D according to Rule 1. Alternatively, a device intended to diagnose syphilis, a sexually transmitted agent in the individual, would fall under Class C according to Rule 3. As manufacturer, you should proceed as follows. Review all the classification rules and determine which is the highest risk class applicable to your device according to the intended use. The registration effort increases with risk class. Class D, the highest risk class, requires in addition continuous batch verification and the involvement of a reference lab, whereas Class A non-sterile analyzers, standard laboratory systems, accessory require only a self-declaration. The resulting essential safety and performance requirements trigger the required clinical validation effort. Usually when 2 or more devices are used together, they are in general classified in their own rights, but there are exceptions. Software which drives or influences the use will fall in the same class as that device. Calibrators, same class as the device. Control materials with quantitative or qualitative assigned values falls in the same class. The instructions need to reflect the intended purpose. Here's some examples of most common issues you may find in instructions for use of IVDR products, which were less critical actually under the IVD rules. So for instance, other uses are recommended for the device than those defined in the intended purpose, like using FFP versus blood sample types. having an automation step included, which is not described. Attributing functions and properties to the product that it doesn't possess. Creating a false impression regarding treatment or diagnosis and function of properties. Failing to inform users or patients of the anticipated risks. The intended purpose has, of course, also influence on the study design. The study design is fundamentally determined by the intended purpose. Whether it's a study aiming to demonstrate clinical validity for a diagnostic device or a screening assay as an example, the approach will be inherently different. Make sure you have access to the corresponding samples in the required amounts. Having IVDR-conform marketing material will become a tough education for sales and marketing people as myself. How often did I bend the IFU, e.g. for CE IVD or FDA-approved products just to please customers or distinguish my product from competition? The warnings from regulatory affairs department I didn't really take serious in the past. Now, being more educated in this, I can only stress that IVDR is legally binding and can be enforced by authorities, eventually leading to product recalls and severe fines. In summary, the intended purpose is crucial for qualifying a device as a medical device. It should be thoroughly defined at the very beginning, as it determines the classification and is the basis for several important decisions, such as the path of the conformity assessment and eventually the amount of clinical data required to demonstrate conformity with the essentially safety and performance requirements. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the nice impulse lecture here on the intended purpose under the IVDR. I can now present the results of the poll. Let me do the screen sharing. So we had a response rate of 64% of attendees of this webinar. For 9%, it's not very clear what the IVDR requires for the intended purpose. 17% said it's not clear, and 74% said it's somewhat clear. And with this, I would like to hand over to Andreas. He will give a demonstration in the IVD Assistant for us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simone, and also thank you to Andreas for paving the way and explaining the complexity of the definition of the intended purpose and also its impact. It's really important to understand that this definition really is a word-by-word definition sometimes, because each and every word could count, because everything that you define within the intended purpose, you again need to prove in the performance evaluation, for example. Before I start with the presentation of the tool itself, I created a couple of slides which I would like to present right now. For that purpose, I share my screen. I hope you can see it. Just give me a quick sign if that worked, and then I will start the presentation.
Yes, thank you, it works.
Thank you. Okay, so what happened so far? I mean, most of you were also participating in the past webinar, and the first steps we already covered so far were the following 3 questions. So first of all, we found out the answer: are we even a health institution according to the IVDR definition? Because that's an important first step that we need to perform and also to define. The second question we answered in the past webinar was to identify the different scenarios which could lead to the in-house IVD scenario, which means that the identification of the in-house devices within the health institution is a very crucial part as well. And the third thing that we covered in the past webinar was to come up with some ideas on how to potentially group or set up a strategy on the documentation of the different devices. For that, I could only highly recommend to surf to our website again and to try to use our wizard, which is available there as a clickable tool to help you in answering all of these questions. And as already mentioned before, we have all of our webinars, past ones and upcoming ones, on our YouTube channel here. But let's get back to the topic for today. Today we would like to talk about the core point, the intended purpose of a device. And the intended purpose itself is only defined by the manufacturer, so the one who is in charge of specifying the device, or in our case, the workflow potentially, because the workflow is the thing that occurs in most times in the in-house situation at the laboratories. So the intended purpose, this is the first topic. The questions that arise here is how to formulate the intended purpose in accordance with the IVDR. And Andreas already mentioned relevant parts of the in vitro diagnostic regulation. So Annex 1, which is especially covered also via the Article 5.5. So Annex 1 is definitely something we need to take care of from the point of view of a laboratory or a health institution in compliance, or making our in-house devices compliant. But there is also a section in Annex 2, which is worth to be mentioned here, because it helps us in explaining a little bit more what could be required in the definition of the intended purpose. The second part is the qualification as a medical device, or in our case, an in vitro diagnostic device. What does that mean? That means that we, of course, need also to demonstrate that our tools, our workflows, our devices are even covered by the in vitro diagnostic regulation. Of course, there are applications like in forensics, or similar application, or maybe even applications for wellness or fitness topics, which are not covered by the IVDR. So we need also to demonstrate that our device is falling into the definition of the in vitro diagnostic according to the IVDR. And the third point is then also the risk classification. Although this risk classification is mentioned in Annex 8 of the IVDR and formally not directly mentioned for the in-house device situation, still laboratories and health institutions should consider classifying their own products. Why? Because on the one hand, Article 5.5 comes up with some requirements which are directly linked to the relevant class, and on the other hand, the classification itself, A, B, C, D, represents the risk level, the risk classification. And many of your doings, your steps, and also your handling of these devices needs to be tailored to the relevant risk. So we are talking here about a risk-based approach. And the good thing here is that for all of these three things, we already provide solutions within our IVD Assistant. So with the release that is happening today, we already cover very nice tools to answer the first two questions, the intended purpose topic, and also the qualification. And just with a few clicks, you will be able to create documents to demonstrate your thoughts on these topics, and also to demonstrate these documents to, for example, a national competent authority in the future. The third topic, the risk classification, will be available very soon, and there we will also come up with a very nice tool that helps you in walking through the classification, and just with a few clicks you will find out about the class of your device. So give it a purpose is today's topic. And with the IVD Assistant, you can do the following things. We will see that just in a couple of minutes. First of all, you will be able to create your device and just make it available within the system in a digital way. You just need to answer a few questions and the general information, like, for example, the device type itself, some ID data on this device, the clearance, which is in our case typically the in-house IVD and also contact persons and so on. And then the smart part of the tool starts, which means that you will then be guided through a small wizard. And this wizard is similar to a small questionnaire. It will ask you several questions. You click through those questions. This serves as a collection of the information which is relevant to formulate the intended purpose statement at the end. And as you then can see that based on this information collected and together with our prepared templates, you will be able to create your documentation on those topics really just in a couple of minutes. The interesting part here is that these templates will be pre-filled with this data, pre-populated, and there is a lot of automation based on different rules in the background. But you as a user, you do not need to care about those things. You just might enjoy the usage of the tool itself. Available soon with the classification, there will be the classification wizard. So the similar concept, we will have the wizard, which guides you through the collection of relevant information to determine the class according to the IVDR Annex 8. And yeah, as I already told you, this is definitely also relevant to be performed in the future and also to be documented, because some of the requirements really depend on the final class of your device. And of course, there will also be the document template for this relevant topic for the classification, pre-filled and also automated. Okay, I just want to spend one more slide on a small explanation of the concept, because I think it's also good to get a grasp on that topic. So instead of starting in the middle of a random Excel sheet or a Word file, our idea is really to have a paradigm shift in the approach itself. That means that we really start always first with informing people, then collecting data, setting up that on a digital way, because yeah, everyone is talking about digital transformation, and also in the regulatory domain, this is a very important part, because only with the digital transformation you will get the best approach to keep everything consistent and so on. So that means by the help of our wizards, you can collect your information in our digital system. This is stored in a database, and based on templates you can select, and based on the rules which are implemented within our system, the system helps you in automatically pre-filling and setting up the documents just with a few clicks. So I think this is really a small revolution also in handling your documents in the future. But enough with the words. I would like to switch now to the presentation of the tool itself. So first of all, what you can see here, we have a software as a service, which can be used via the web browser. I'm already on our system. What you can see here is only our demo environment. So please do not take care of all of these projects here. Those are, of course, only demo projects. First of all, I would like to switch to English for the reason because the webinar is also in English. As you can see, the tool is right now available in German and English, but additional languages will follow soon. The list here represents the devices under assessment, so which are exactly your in-house devices. And it is really simple to create a new device by pressing the relevant button. And as I already said, the first thing you need to do is just to answer a handful of questions regarding your general device. And that's what I exactly would like to do with you together right now. So first of all, we need to answer the question in which language we will create our technical documentation. The reason is because sometimes the users themselves have a different language and would like to set their tool in a different language, and the documentation is in English, for example. So therefore, there's a small difference. And then I need to give this device or workflow a certain name. In our example, we could say it is a PCR workflow for HIV-1 detection. I need to determine which device or workflow type we have. In some cases, it's only a single type of device, like a control material or instrument. That could happen, for example, if a laboratory creates their own software in-house and only focuses on that software. But I assume in many, many cases, we have the situation of a workflow here. So that's exactly what I would like to select here in the example. In the next step, I also need to assign a certain version number for my device. As we are now the manufacturers, the virtual or real manufacturers of this device, we also need to assign a version number. This is important because otherwise it would not be possible to perform certain traceability tasks. So in our case, I would just simply say, okay, I give it the version number 1.0. I can also assign a certain internal ID. This is not mandatory, but if you like to give an additional label for this, you can do it. Like, for example, PCR 100 or something like that. In the next question, you need to answer which is the regulatory clearance. So as you can see, in some cases, you can also document REOs, but this is exactly the clearance you would like to assign to your device. And in our case, this would be the in-house IVD case, so this Article 5.5 case. Furthermore, I need a short description. I've already prepared a small paragraph for that, just for the sake of the demonstration. This is also not mandatory, but extremely helpful also in improving the documentation. And I also need to provide a contact person. So this contact person is the person who is responsible for this device. Also, again, for quality management aspects, whom you would like to ask if you have some questions or problems with that device. In our case, I will use the most famous German person, Max Mustermann, here as contact person, and this person also needs to be assigned to a certain role. In our case, I would say Max is a laboratory technician because, yeah, we already know in many, many cases, unfortunately, laboratory technicians sometimes get assigned to the task to also perform the regulatory compliance activities. Okay. Save and create, and that was all. The device is now existing within the system, and you can see already here, very nice from top to bottom, the roadmap that we typically provide within our system. So the general information is green, it's ticked, it's completed, so I'm fine with that. Whenever I have to do some changes, I just need to click there and can update my device, but for now, this is good. Okay. The topic today, intended purpose, we tackle it with, as I already indicated, with a small wizard. The wizard helps you in orienting yourself by asking you some questions, and only afterwards it allows you to open your documents. So let's just jump into the wizard itself. And here we go. So here we have the questions. The first question in that case is which IVD devices are included in your workflow. So the system recognized that we have selected workflow as type, and therefore it also knows that we would definitely have some individual types of components within the workflow. So let's say we have a calibrator, control material, instrument, a kit, reagent, and software combined to one workflow within our own PCR workflow. In the next question, and that has been already emphasized by Andreas as well, is what exactly is the intention? For which purpose should it be used in the medical? In which direction should it go? Is it a tool that should be used for diagnosis, direct diagnosis? And the text here always provides you some more information and also some examples here. Or is it only to be used as an aid to diagnosis? So not solely responsible for the result of a diagnosis, but helping in getting to a certain diagnosis, for example. Or also prognosis, predisposition, prediction, monitoring, screening, and so on. So in our case, let's say I I say that my device is to be used as an aid to diagnosis, and potentially also for monitoring. For example, if I want to track certain parameters during already existing disease, for example. Maybe also for screening, because I maybe also want to use it on healthy people as well. But this is, as I said, already fully up to you, where you set your own boundaries for your device. The next question focuses on terms which you also might already know from the IVDR. So this is important because with those terms, you can finally determine if your device is an IVD or not, and what exactly it's focusing on. So is it focusing on a physiological state, so more on the potential healthy side, or is it more focusing on pathological states or processes? Is it really for a definite disease or a clinical condition, or maybe also for topics like compatibility and checking with potential recipients, etc. So in our case, I will do my selection again, and I would say for me, the pathological process is applicable, and we also have identified a certain disease related to HIV, and we would potentially also say we would like to monitor certain therapeutic measures during the treatment on the disease itself. Okay, so far so good. Now we need also to ask, what is the specified indication itself? Again, there is a small example already provided in there, but typically you have to describe what exactly you want to, what is your indication. You can, on the one hand, focus on certain diseases using ICD codes, for example, or on the other hand, just explain what is the indication you're going for. I would keep it rather straightforward. Detection of the HIV type 1 virus, and based on the nucleic acids in human blood. Okay, next question. Facing the specimen types. Normally, as we all know, IVDs are always working on human specimens. So that's the biggest difference to medical devices, which in most cases, or almost all cases, are applied directly on human beings. IVD is always going to be applied on a specimen taken from human. Why there are different selections possible here is just because of the reason that the human specimen could be the input into our workflow. But if you're only focusing on software, for example, then potentially the input interface is not the specimen itself, but only data generated from an earlier examination of the human specimen. So prior data that has been created. In our case, I would say we take the human specimen because we have blood probes here, and this is a fluid specimen. So you can see, you can click through a certain taxonomy of the specification of specimen types after selecting the human specimen type, and we would say that we are using it on EDTA blood only. Okay, then there is another question regarding the real-time PCR workflow associated with none, one, or more analytes, and are they specific or unspecific? So the options you have here is either you have a specific analyte or unspecific analytes, again with several examples here, or even with no analytes. So in very few examples, like a specimen collector, for example, you typically would not assign a specified analyte here. In our case, we have a specific analyte, and therefore you also need to answer the question, what is the analyte? And we could say that our tool or our in-house device is used to detect the complementary DNA of HIV-1. Does real-time PCR workflow use a qualitative, quantitative, or semi-quantitative method. This is also important to be answered to get to the intended purpose, because you will definitely have different ways to demonstrate validity, whether it is a qualitative or a quantitative tool. In our case, let's say we have a quantitative measurement. And finally, I also need to answer what exactly is the target population. The target population also needs to be reflected in the data you provide for the validation, for example. So the broader the target population, potentially the more data you also need to provide for this task. In our case, we can, just for the sake of the demonstration, keep it rather broad and say, okay, the general population, everyone is more or less feasible to be applied to this tool or to this in-house device. And last but not least, who is the intended user? In many cases, it will be a healthcare professionals for in-house devices. There are only a few, very few examples where you potentially also create in-house devices, which then should be applied by lay persons within the health institution. And then you can specify a little bit more into detail which type of healthcare professionals. This is just for the documentation part as well. And we would say that on the one hand, laboratory technicians are using our workflow, and eventually also clinical geneticists when it comes into the interpretation itself. Do we need a specific training in the usage of our own workflow? I would say yes. I would like, as a manufacturer of this workflow, or the one who is specifying this workflow, I would like to see everyone being trained before the first usage. Therefore, I would say yes. And last but not least, the automation grade. So in our case, we potentially have several instruments or devices which help us in automation, but not everything is fully automated. So we have manual steps as well. Therefore, the semi-automation is something that I would like to choose here. And then you have the window where you have the opportunity to enter your intended purpose. So potentially you could say, our device is, but way better is now to use our built-in wizard by clicking on this, because with one single click based on the given information, it provides you with the very nice intended purpose statement that completely fulfills all the requirements from the Annex 1 relevant sections and also the Annex 2 relevant sections for your purpose. So I will just read through it and say, okay, I'm happy with the statement. Of course, you can also add your own 50 cents to it. If you need to adapt it, you can do that. But in our case, I would say I'm happy with it. And I now save it and create it. And as we can see now in our process, it is now completed. And I have now the option to have a look into the following two documents, which are now being created automatically based on the given information and based on the underlying templates. So clicking on it, you see it opens in a fully fledged, what you see is what you get document editor. And if I scroll down in this editor, we see that it is completely pre-populated with all the information that is relevant directly into the document. And if we have a closer look, then we see that based on this information, the document is almost 99% ready. So the only thing that we need to fill out manually is, of course, the things that are relevant to your own document management control. For example, provide an author, reviewer, releaser. This is something we would like to automate in the future, but for now, this is something that you can simply add here by entering the name of this person, the release person, for example, and so on. So if you're happy with the document, you can also export it to a PDF. I will just try that quickly in the meantime, because the PDF finally is eventually the thing that you would then check into your quality management systems and sign off and say, okay, this is the part which you want to demonstrate to everyone who will be asking for it. If you think you're okay with the document, you can also complete the document, tick it off, and you see there is a completed status now. And it's very similar with the next document that is provided here. Same story. Everything is already pre-populated. And again, we already have a 99.9% filled document that completely explains why your device is a medical device and why your device is an in vitro diagnostic device and therefore falls under the IVDR, and all the justifications are already there. So you do not need to add any additional information here. You see all the statements are already pre-filled. And again, I can export it to a PDF where it looks like this. And this document is something that you could also immediately put into your archive of regulatory documentation for this relevant IVD. And if you are happy with it, then we also can complete it. Going back, and now we get a nice sign here. Congratulations, we have now completed all the documentation currently available for this device workflow. That means that according to our IVD Ready program, I have now done for this in-house device everything that is possible up to now. Of course, only up to now, because very soon we will come up with the additional features which you can already see here in the roadmap. Okay, that was my very short introduction into the tool itself. What I demonstrated was a complete walkthrough through the whole thing, from creating the device itself down to creating the general information, and also having provided the intended purpose statement and also the qualification document, within approximately 10 minutes, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas, for this really nice demonstration of the IVD Assistant, the intended purpose wizard. Yeah, so give it a purpose. You can immediately start now using our wizard on the IVD Assistant. All new participants that were on the waiting list in the IVD Ready program that requested access to the IVD Assistant will receive an email with the user credentials and an initial password from us by today. PlatoX users that are already on our platform, they can just log in, will see the updated version that is shown also on this slide here of the IVD Assistant. When you log in, you can see the new design in the screenshot together with the intended purpose wizard section and the intended purpose document section. Last time we have discussed the strategy for documenting your in-house tests. The strategy for your lab is crucial whether your lab has 20 or 250 in-house developed tests. And it defines the content of the intended purpose. The content of the intended purpose then will also define later the content of and the volume of your GSPRs, the general safety performance requirements, and of course also the technical documentation. With this wizard, you can easily create your intended purpose document, and it will be consistent with all other documents in the IVD Assistant for your in-house developed test file. Yeah, just a quick note about the program and the IVD Assistant from us. Again, to fully participate in the program, you really need to have access to the IVD Assistant. During the registration process, you may have already pre-registered for access to the IVD Assistant. Those who have done so will receive their login details from us today. If you haven't pre-registered for the IVD Assistant, you can contact us via email, or you can also register directly on our website. Email contact is info@platomics.com, and then you will receive your user credentials via email from us within 5 business days. If you would like to register for the whole webinar series, you can also do so by just sending us an email and letting us know that you would like to register for the whole webinar series. Also, if you have feedback, further questions, you can always contact us via email to info@platomics.com. On August 29 at 2 p.m., we will have our next webinar with the title Perplexity is the Beginning of Knowledge. If you are not a regulatory expert, it's often hard to understand what the IVDR exactly requires from you. Our excellent regulatory affairs team at Platomics has put a lot of effort and will outline Platomics' knowledge base and a glossary that supports you here. This webinar will outline Platomics' regulatory knowledge base that supports labs in understanding what exactly the IVDR requires of them. Yes, with this, I want to express my sincere thanks to all participants who have joined us and our program IVD Ready by 2024 from around whole Europe so far. Labs can still join us, and so you can invite your colleagues to and share the program. A big thanks to Andreas Eckelt for his great overview on the intended purpose under the IVDR, and Andreas for this really nice comprehensive demonstration of the intended purpose wizard. Thank you. And last but not least, a big thank to our team, especially to our regulatory affairs team, the software developers, the engineers that really worked so with high speed for the release today. So thank you too for making this program even possible. Thank you very much. With this, I wish you a wonderful afternoon on behalf of the Platomics team. Now we will have this small survey on our AI tool. Please answer if you have some feedback for us on this new tool. Thank you very much and good afternoon.